Welcome to Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future with Dr. Bill Chobe. Doc is a historian and a reenactor. On this show, you'll hear his thoughts about our personal liberties from their earliest recorded beginnings. You'll also be transported back to the 1750s to relive the life of Colonel George Washington and his adventures during the French and Indian War. Let's get started. Here's Dr. Bill Chobe.
Okay, welcome back. Dr. Bill Chobe. We're talking about liberty in America, past, present, future. When might is right, we live in bondage. When right is might, we live in freedom. Right becomes wrong, we live in chaos until might or right becomes the law. And then we have freedom or bondage. So today we're going to talk about a whole new creation of the federal government. Now, mind you that we had three branches of government: the president, the executive, the judicial, the courts, and legislative, meaning the Senate and the Congress, House of Representatives. Now, as the nation grew, particularly after the Civil War, there were many issues that came about because of technology, and the most prominent one there was the railroad, but we had the telegraph, so people could communicate and do business across state lines, which brought up, whenever controversy was brought up between two states, it did become a federal jurisdiction, and courts then became involved. The one that was most notable was between the farmers and selling their grain by putting it on railroads and passing it through states. The conflict was that somebody wasn't getting a fair deal, whether it's a railroad or whether it's the farmers, and so Congress was asked to step in on it. It ended up before the courts, and in 1887, the courts recommended that Congress establish an agency to handle interstate commerce. So that commission was created in 1887. And what it did was, in order to solve these problems between the farmers and the railroads, it was given executive, judicial, and legislative authority. Legislative meaning in terms of regulations, the judicial meaning in terms of administrative judges, and the executive through the bureaucrats. Now, as this model got going, and Congress found itself that it was more free to do things, that they felt were necessary at the time, this was sort of like a fire and forget kind of deal. Once they were set up, these people were just out there doing whatever they wanted to do, as long as they stayed within the confines of the statute, or the statute meaning the law that was passed. Nobody would bother with them if they stayed within the boundaries of the law. And at first, it was a great idea. It solved a lot of problems, and it seemed to be a workable way to do things. So after that, then we had other agencies starting to be created that, again, required a certain amount of expertise that Congress didn't have. Gradually, these agencies increased their demand for budgeting, and with that, then the federal funds that flowed to these things grew with it as almost a necessary kind of mandatory fixed cost for the federal government. As time went on, of course, they kept finding new and more and inventive ways to recreate themselves, because people who are ambitious in their positions of power, of course, always want to expand that influence and make a difference under their name, or make a mark for their name, if you will. So from 1887, then other agencies started to pop up, and whenever the creation of the federal income tax came along, of course, the IRS was born, and we know just how much the IRS has grown and what they're doing. And recently, the request to hire 87,000 new agents is a sign of just how powerful and how expansive these agencies can grow. Now, so what happens when somebody is the head of an agency and really screws up? Can they be fired? Well, unfortunately not, because civil service laws are very clear. These bureaucrats are very highly protected, and they're so smug in what they do that they pretty much have become the fourth branch of government that's untouchable. And we see that today, whenever some of the major screw-ups that we have by our federal agencies, that nobody's ever held accountable. They're locked into cushy jobs. They're very well paid better than most Americans, and they have really wonderful perks, retirement plans, etc. And they've come to a point where they're so secure that many of them believe that they are the permanent government, and congressmen and senators and presidents just come and go, and they just go about doing their business of running the country. That sounds good, and it sounds like you shouldn't have politicians meddling in the affairs of, say, the post office, which is an agency that part of this too. And for many reasons, that holds a lot of credibility, but also, when the cat's away, the mice will play. And without any kind of really oversight of any kind of value on these bureaucracies, they run amok. As we talked about since the beginning, it has been businesses that were regulated by these agencies found that if they found favor, they could benefit in the business world. So the moves were on to lobby these agencies, again, out of sight of the public, out of sight of Congress. And if they found a way to get appointments or people in civil service to go and to become part of the bureaucracy itself, then they had a foot in the door that others didn't have. And consequently, it became a situation where it was like the fox guarding the hen house. And those who had an inside track on what was going on with the agencies handsomely profited by that association. Now, as time goes on, through the expansion of government after World War I, and particularly under the guise of FDR, who wanted everything to be, federalized, everything from different companies. During the World War II, he did things that were unconstitutional, stacking the court, as I previously mentioned, and of course, violating the confidence that people had in him by running for office 4 times and being elected 4 times. He died in the 4th. But from that time, with the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission, it then has become a favorable or favorite tool for presidents to push their agenda outside of the constraint of Congress. Now, we look at the example of the EPA and what environmental regulations have done to the freedom of people today. It's rather shocking, but it's been a gradual growth. But you look at what the president now is doing about trying to shut down fossil fuel-fired electric plants. That's all comes out of environmental stuff, environmental laws. Department of Environmental Protection Agency was created some 30, 40 years ago. I do remember the very first Earth Day to come on that we had. I was in college at the time, and I was studying in what was called field biology, which later on became called environmental sciences. And I have essentially a minor in environmental sciences. Going back to the get-go, when it was conservation, it wasn't all this craziness about theories of atmospheric change and carbon, the damage that carbon does. But back at that time, we had one of our class projects was to show how you could shop ecologically. And of course, being college kids, college sophomores, we came up with a brilliant solution to buy our beer in kegs rather than cans. And so that's how serious it was taken at the time. But there was some of the more far out kinds of theories about the oncoming of the nuclear winter or the ice age coming back. And then as time went on and that didn't happen, and those climate prophets sort of fell apart, then they'd come up with another theory. And then it was global warming for a while, and the Earth was going to be swamped by this melting Arctic and subarctic or Antarctic ice caps, and everybody's going to die. New York City's going to be underwater. In fact, I believe Barack Obama was out there saying that was going to happen. And, and years ago, I was up in Massachusetts, and I happened to stop by where Plymouth was, the original colonies of the Mayflower. And there it was by the sea. It was this big rock with 1620 written on it. And that was supposed to be the Plymouth Rock. And of course, surrounded by a little cage so people couldn't deface it. But at that time, when I looked at it, it seemed like it was right by the sea, right by the ocean, just as it had been in 1620. And I've seen recent photographs here in 2024 or 2023 that show that sea level's the same. So here we have all these prognosticators about how the ice is going to melt and everybody's going to die and all this global warming stuff. It really has nothing to do with the reality of the climate. But we have an EPA that believes, along with some of these crazies, that they have to go and regulate everything, often in backroom deals in the middle of thousands of pages of nonsense or regulatory ease that was never even seen by any of the Congress people. And the next thing you know, they're in your backyard saying that a puddle that stays there is a wetlands and therefore they have jurisdiction. This is what the age of bureaucracy has created. So it's one that we must fully understand, that the only way we're going to preserve our freedom is not through so much the elections of people that we agree with in Congress, but we also have to push our Congress people, our senators and presidents to rein in the bureaucrats, because they are petty tyrants with more power than a lot of Congress people have. And they execute that power in a progressive basis, with their whole permanent bureaucracy, often called the swamp, and that's eroding our freedoms a little bit at a time. Now, was this something that happened overnight? No, and I believe it. If we look at the words of James Madison, who warned about this, almost 250 years ago, and he wrote, and I will quote, "I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedoms of the people by the gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations." Here it is, folks. Here it is. So when you think about liberty, freedom, we got to think about the bureaucrats, not only at the federal level, but these bureaucracies are at the state level. They're at the local level. They call them municipal authorities in Pennsylvania. They're bureaucracies. They often just do what they want to do. And unless you're aware of the enabling legislation that created them and the constraints that the legislators have put on them, the boundaries of sorts that in which fence in their federal or state or local power, unless you understand where those boundaries are, they will just walk right over you. So I'm hoping this has been enlightening to you today. And think about this when you're looking at that bill from your municipal authority or from some state agency, whether it be the Environmental Protection of something or the IRS or the State Department of Revenue. All these things come from the bureaucrats who enjoy a pretty good life with very high income, nice perks and bennies, and wonderful retirement plans. And you hear very little from them because they're really well protected, thanks to our government's failing to do their job of oversight. Instead of reining these people in, they're out there raising money for campaigns. They ought to get back to work and bring this country under control. Again, when might is right, we live in bondage. When right is might, we live in freedom. And when right becomes wrong, we live in chaos, until either right or might becomes in power, and we have a choice between bondage and freedom. So with that thought, I'm going to let you go here. You can look up about my book, more on this, drbillchobysbooks.com. The podcast will be there, as well as ways to order my books directly from my publisher, and leave comments if you choose. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.